Hello everybody, welcome to the live stream. I thought we'd make a start. We haven't run this for a couple of weeks, so apologies for that, because of just work stuff taking over, other work stuff, but here we are for today, so we'll get into it in a second, but just to explain how it works, it's a quick look ahead to the stuff for next week, announcements. There's a lot happening next week. And then we'll go through the major markets, indices, commodities, FX, to see where the opportunities might be, as usual. And then once I've gone through all the major markets, I'll jump into any questions you have. Okay, so we've got up to an hour, so we'll see how we get on. Let's just get the risk warning done. This presentation is only for educational purposes. It does not contain and should not be construed as containing investment advice or an investment recommendation or an offer of or solicitation for a transaction in any financial instrument. David Jones and Capital.com accept no responsibility for any use that may be made of these comments and for any consequences that result. Spread bets and CFDs, went too far, are complex instruments and come with a high risk of losing money rapidly due to leverage. 78.9% of retail investor accounts lose money when spread betting and or trading CFDs with this provider. You should consider whether you understand how spread bets and CFDs work and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. Okay, that's that. Let's take a look at next week. A lot going on next week. Of course, it's all about inflation. We know that in markets. Inflation and interest rates. So let's go start things off Monday. So I think it's about 10 to midnight UK time, but the minutes from the latest Bank of Japan, the Central Bank of Japan, their meeting. Again, these minutes are important because it can give an indication as to how the central bank sees the economy and some hints as to future rate changes. Then on Wednesday, Australian inflation. So again, inflation is still the big thing. And then Wednesday evening UK time, US interest rate decision. So expected to raise rates again. But, once again, it's perhaps not so much the decision that's important here, but the chat by the Federal Reserve around the decision as to how aggressive they're going to carry on being. Then on Thursday, we've got US GDP. How well or not has the US economy done in the second quarter of the year? And Friday, EU GDP. How well or not is the European economy doing? So it is a busy week next week for announcements. And of course we had this week, we'll have a look at FX markets in a second, but we had finally the European Central Bank raised rates this week for the first time in, I think it's 11 years, wasn't it? So they're catching up with everybody else. And raising rates, joining the rate raising race from the pit lane, the European Central Bank this week. So yeah, it's really quite an aggressive rate rising environment, isn't it? As this inflation sticks around longer than we expected. Quick contact thing. Capital.com, obviously, so I do this with. Any questions, david.jones@capital.com. I do have some emails that people sent me about a week ago to catch up on. Apologies, I will get around to it. I've just been a bit disorganised. Twitter, I'm at Jones the Markets, and then jonesthemarkets.com to find out more about my trading approach and the trading course I run. And of course, follow Capital.com on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Right, I thought we start markets. So we'll start with the S&P 500. I think actually at the moment, all markets, give or take, we're almost having, it feels like we're having a bit of a rest from the major trends that have been in place this year. So, stock markets have been down for a lot of this year. The last month we've seen stock markets recover. The dollar has been smashing everything this year, and we've seen a slight comeback for the euro and the pound. We'll have a look at those in a minute, but it does feel like we're having a bit of a break from these major trends. And of course, the question is this a reversal, or is it just a bit of a pause before, boom, the major trends resume? So anyway, on the S&P 500, actually the biggest winning trade at the moment in this account. So this, if you're new to this is a real money account, and I use this for all the videos that we do throughout the week and the live stream. The biggest winner, we did a video on the Dow Jones, the US Wall Street 30, on the 5th of July, and that trade is up £640. So that was a buy at 30,400, and the market's moved about 1,700 points. So that's worked well from then, and so that's made twice the risk. And for me, that's what it's all about. It's not being right all the time. It's how much do you make when you're right versus what you lose when you're wrong. If I'm only right half the time, but when I'm right, I make 600 quid, and when I'm wrong, I lose 300 quid. That is a profitable trading strategy. So the Dow's doing well. The Tech 100, the Nasdaq, can't remember when I did that trade, but anyway, that trade's on from the 14th of July. It's up a couple hundred quid. And there's a short S&P trade. Don't know when I did that. I can't remember that one either. That's an order that's been in for ages. Okay, so to sell at 4,000. So that short has kicked in as well. So there, I think the big winners at the moment. There's a Euro Aussie short that's doing okay. There's nothing else really amazing at the moment. But anyway, let's get back to it. Let's look at the S&P. So for me, I have to, all right, stock markets are still strong, but I am expecting this to run out of steam. So that for me is like the default position at the moment is, okay, for me, that trend is just about down. I think it's going to be a really interesting week next week, particularly with this US interest rate decision on Wednesday. How does the market react? So I think it's been a really good rally. I've made a bit myself on this rally as well. But I think it's going to be interesting to see, does this market start to roll over next week? I saw a lot of chat on Twitter last night about, the S&P is going to go through 4,000. I mean, 4,000, it's irrelevant for the S&P. It went below it, it flipped around it, it tanked below it, and it sort of nudged above it today. To me, 4,000 is not an important level for the S&P. For me, the big level to watch on the S&P is a couple of 100 points higher than where we are now. It's the end of May highs. Okay, that was a big stumbling block. It knocked its head up here. End of May, beginning of June, and then bang, moved to fresh lows for that move. So I think really interesting week next week. Looking to see if stock markets run out of steam, but plenty of momentum still at the moment. Yeah, the market still has momentum. So I would not. That short I showed you was from an old video where I left the order in. So fair enough, but I'd be waiting for a bit of weakness. But I think we may be getting to the place where it starts looking a bit vulnerable. So let's see what happens. Same with the Nasdaq. What do we call the Nasdaq? The US Tech 100. So I'm guessing these US markets are going to look pretty much the same. So for me on the Nasdaq, I would probably pick up on the trend since maybe that's okay, that'll do. So again, for me on the Nasdaq, similar sort of levels. Yes, we've had a great run on the Nasdaq, relatively speaking. The market has rallied from just below 11,000 to 12,600. So we've seen nearly a 1,600 point move on the Nasdaq since those June lows. But this was the where it ran out of steam last time round. Let's call it 13,000. So 400 points higher than where we are now. So for me, there is absolutely still some upside left in these indices. But again, I would just be a bit wary next week that we see the sellers start to come in again. Let's see what happens. So that's that. I mean, the Ftse is a little bit different, as we know. Different makeup to these markets, these US markets. But so the Ftse is pretty sideways for the year. Or if we go back to October, pretty sideways. It's built a good base above 7,000. Maybe there's a bit of gas left in the Ftse to squeeze up to 7,600. But as usual, it's going to be dependent on what happens in US markets. So Ftse, no real change really. Trading range, no real trend. Has been served very well as a defensive play this year. DAX, I was going to buy the DAX this week. I didn't buy it in the end, but I did wonder for the DAX. I'd like to buy a pullback in the DAX. That's what I'm trying to say. So the DAX, I think the DAX, for me, the DAX is interesting. And I don't watch the DAX very often, but it's arguably become interesting for me because we had this low in March for the DAX, and of course, US markets carried on lower into May and June. But the DAX, this has been quite the level, this sort of 12,400 level in the DAX. It's been a big one. So for me, I'd like to, let's see if we get a pullback next week on the DAX, and I'd quite like to be a buyer of a pullback of the DAX because 12.4 is proving to be pretty big support. So let's see what happens with the DAX next week. And finally, the Nikkei, Japan 225. Let's have a look at that. I'm not quite sure. I haven't looked at that for ages. We did have a short on that. Came out of that short. I don't know. I think you could almost make the argument: is the trend reversing on the Nikkei? For me, I would be tempted to go short if it starts to run out of steam. And again, 28,650. So only about 800 points higher than where we are now. But that has been a problem for the Nikkei all the way, well, let's call it 28.8, all the way back to the beginning of January this year. So let's see what happens with the Nikkei. So I'd be, like these US markets, perhaps starts to look a bit vulnerable to a bit of a sell-off. Let's see what happens. Yeah. So maybe we'll see these markets blast through these levels next week, and then we have a real reversal on our hands. But for now, I'd just be a little bit wary that the sellers are going to start creeping back in. But it's an interesting one next week for these markets. Now, gold. I did a video yesterday on gold, and so it's on the channel. And it was a big move. I didn't do a trade in the video, but it was a really big move yesterday in gold. But just to take a step back, you know, I said in the video yesterday, it's again really big levels for gold. You know, we had the flash crash low from August last year, down at 1663. These lows from March last year, down at 1680. So gold, massive support down here. And again, this was another one like the DAX that I really wanted to buy it this week for my own account, but it slipped yesterday. It did slip to a new low, reversed really sharply, as you can see. So we had bullish engulfing candlestick there. So I think, you know, we can see it squeeze a bit higher, but it doesn't feel as if that downtrend is over yet for gold. So for me, I'm still looking to see if these big old levels hold. I'd still, if it ran up to 1800, I'd definitely look to go short. But let's see, does it through the summer finally make a bit of a base ahead of these old big levels? Let's see what happens. So I'm quite happy to be patient with gold at the moment because that trend from March is still down. Let's wait for this thing to resolve itself. Yeah, so I don't think we're going to see gold at $2,000 anytime soon. So I'm quite happy to be a bit patient here and see, can we end this trend and build a base down here? So that's gold. Silver, I do have a short on silver, I think. Yeah, so I've been short silver since the 13th of May at $20.50. I know I've said this a few times, I hate silver as a market. I think it's for me, it's a frustrating market to trade, but this is where we are on silver. So, you know, this month it has moved to its lowest since July 2020. So it's a 2-year low on silver. That trend is still down. It has been a dull week, as you can see. Really tight. You can see that there, can you? Tight trading. Dull week. I'm happy to stay short. The trend is still down. If it breaks 18, perhaps we'll see, you know, we could see quite a sell-off if it breaks 18. You know, down to maybe 16 is what I'd be looking for. But for me, I mean, I hate silver, but the trend is still down on silver. So let's see what happens. Now, oil. I've said a few times, I think, on these live streams. I just think I've said it for a few months now. I think it's just oil is just a flip-flop market at the moment, you know, and we've seen this since we had that run up in March to $126 a barrel after the Russian invasion. Tries to run back up to it in June, runs out of steam at 120, and here we are now. So I think it's just a sideways market. Arguably, it's a trading buy down here. Okay, we've got, you know, it is the trend. The trend is still down. If we're going to be, you know, sensible about this, if I flip this over to an hourly, you'd probably say the trend is still down. But I just think it's a sideways market. So for me, it wouldn't surprise me if oil, in 2 weeks' time was still at $96 a barrel or thereabouts. That trend is down. Arguably, that's a good short if you fancied it, going short. I'd have my stop probably above 103. But, whenever we've seen oil down here on the daily charts, we have seen it snap back. So I think it is, like I say, it's a sideways market, oil. Although I think the big trend from April is still up. Okay, so for me, my bias would still be to go with a big trend. Big trend is still up. We're still in this correction that's been going on now since for about a month. So I wonder if we see it get knocked back a bit next week, and I wonder then, is there going to be a buying opportunity? Okay, but I think overall you can see the sideways range in oil since March. So I suppose you could argue, is oil going to break out to new highs for the year? I would say no, unless we have an escalation of the geopolitical situation. Someone mentioned it about 4 months ago. What would it take? A nuclear war. Someone drops a nuclear bomb somewhere, or uses it. Something that we absolutely are not expecting. So I can't see the argument for oil going above $126 a barrel. Can't see it happening this year. So I would argue, the risk is for a shock to the downside. So the risk is we have much weaker economic growth than we're expecting even. So perhaps that's the risk for oil. Perhaps it's more likely to drop $30 than it is to go up $30. But for me, the big trend is still up. So I'd still be leaning to be a buyer at the moment. But, I think it's been a pretty sideways market for the last few months now. Natural gas, I think I was going to say that has cooled off, but it hasn't. Here it goes again. Natural gas is nuts, isn't it? I mean, natural gas went from dropped 30%, right, from these highs in June, 965, June the 8th, July the 4th, 550, 540. Massive move in natural gas. I did a video on natural gas this week, put an order in to buy the dip, didn't get filled, as far as I know. Let me have a quick look. Where was my order? Because I thought I'd just get filled in the volatility. Yeah. So I was trying to buy 510 on natural gas, and it's just I don't think it's really looked back this week. So I've missed that, unfortunately. I think I was looking at it maybe here and wondering if it dropped back a bit. It's not happened. I mean, that's a great trend again in natural gas, but it is. You can look at these massive moves with that trend. So let's see what happens. So for me, I suppose if I had to do a trade now, I'd be a buyer. I do wonder, is it going to run into problems again up here? We spent a lot of time from 8.5 to 9.5 from May to June, and then eventually rolled over. So I do wonder, are we going to see it run out of steam next week? Let's see what happens. But again, the big trend in gas off the June 2020 lows, 2-year trend is still up in natural gas. There's all that Nord Stream stuff going on at the moment, isn't there? Questions about whether the Russians were going to open up the Nord Stream pipe after doing routine maintenance. I think that went ahead. I can't remember. I'm not paying attention to it this week. So a whole load of geopolitical stuff going on at the moment in the gas market. So, but interesting to watch next week. See what happens if it starts to run out of steam up here. I would favour it running out of steam, but with natural gas, you never know. We could come in on Monday and it could have doubled. Yeah, it's just a crazy market, natural gas. And let's take a look at the currencies. Let's start with the dollar index. Absolutely, I say this every week, favourite market, the dollar index. But the dollar has started cooling off over the last week. Okay, so we've seen the dollar. So the dollar index is the US dollar against a basket of different currencies. So the dollar index touched 109 the 14th of July, so just over a week ago. And we're now down at 106. So the market's dropped about 300 points. But the big trend in the dollar index is down. I did actually do a short-term trade on the dollar index this week, and I shorted it. I don't think I've shorted the dollar index in years, but I thought there was an interesting short-term trade going short, so I went short at 106.50. I think. But the big trend, absolutely still up on the dollar index. But definitely could unwind a bit from where it is now and still be in an uptrend. So I think it's interesting, particularly with the US interest rate decision next week and the US GDP announcement next week. A lot going on next week that could affect the US dollar. So a really interesting market to watch. But from a medium-term point of view, I'm absolutely a buyer of dips of the US dollar. So let's see what happens. But it's having a weak finish to the week. So of course, because we are seeing a weaker US dollar, stuff like the euro is going up. So here's the euro. Let's have a look at that interest rate decision. So that was the interest rate decision yesterday, wasn't it? Expected. Oh, no, that wasn't yesterday. That's the interest rate decision. Sorry, that was the interest rate decision. There we go, from the European Central Bank. No surprises. And as you often see, this is why I think trading things like payrolls and news announcements very hard, because the market hasn't moved. Thinks, oh, we really like this. Oh, actually, no, we don't really like this. So you can really get these extreme moves. But anyway, this is where we are for euro against the dollar. Having a bit of a run yesterday, traded to its highest levels in about 2 weeks. Big deal. But the big trend for the euro is absolutely still down. So for me, I would still be looking to sell any more strength from here. But for me, perhaps the better trade if it pushes up another couple of 100 points from here and then starts to run out of steam. So I think there's lots to watch next week, because we are seeing in stock markets and currency markets these counter trend moves. Yeah, so we've had the euro's been sliding since at least May last year. But of course, no market moves in a straight line. It has absolutely fallen off a cliff this year, but we get counter trend moves. So for me, the move we're in now is potentially no different to this sort of move here or this sort of move here, when the market has a bit of a breather and bang, down we go again. Let's see what happens. So interesting to watch next week. Unfortunately, the batteries in my mouse have just started running out of steam, so I'm doing that thing where you don't have any batteries, where you switch it off and switch it on again, and it gives you an extra 20 minutes. Pound against the dollar. Pound against the dollar, we're going to see the same sort of thing. I'll tell you something interesting at the moment, pound against the dollar. But pound against the dollar, same thing. So we've had, a bit of a run from 118 about a week ago to 120 and a bit, where we are now. So a bit of a move, but it doesn't change the trend. That's the trend since February of this year. The bigger trend going back to last year, when it was 142 in May of last year. Now it's 120. It's 15% lower. So still weak. But with the pound, there is this big level. So maybe, I think it's far too early to say, but maybe the second half of this year now, perhaps we do see the dollar start to unwind some of these gains, because this was big support for the pound back then. What made me think about the pound? I was reading a story today. Let me see if I can bring it up. So it was in the Times, so the UK paper. Let's see if I can find it. It was on the front page as well. And it was about, because as you know, if you're not in the UK, you haven't been subjected to the leadership campaign that's going on at the moment for the leader of the Tory party. But there was a story, which obviously I can't find now, obviously, always the way. There was a story where they said that the pound would collapse if whoever it was, Liz Truss, I don't even know, was it Liz Truss, ended up being the Prime Minister. And they'd spoken to a load of economists, and every economist in this story, which of course I can't find now, was saying that the pound was going to collapse. And I think whenever everybody thinks the market is going to go one way, that's absolutely when the market goes the other way. So for me, that's a sentiment thing with the pound, that perhaps everyone's getting too bullish on the dollar. They think it's free money. Just buy the dollar because of inflation, because of interest rates. It's going to be free money. This is exactly when the market goes the other way. So for me, it's interesting here. We're still in this downtrend, absolutely, but maybe we will see a reversal start over the next couple of months. Let's see what happens. We'll see what happens during the summer. So that's pound against the dollar. I would still sell a rally though at the moment, but quite interesting some of the sentiment around that. Bitcoin. Does anybody care about cryptocurrencies anymore? So Bitcoin is, I think it looks like it's made a bit of a base, isn't it? Around 20,000 Bitcoin. I'd argue, the trend is still down. So again, I don't think it's going to be troubling 40,000 anytime soon. A bit like gold, for example. That gold, the trend is still down. Perhaps we'll see some chop while it sorts the trend out. But for me, if it rallied up to sort of 28,000, it looks like it could be a short, doesn't it? So I'll be patient on that and see. But perhaps this sort of 18 to 20k ends up being a bit of a psychological level for Bitcoin. I must admit, I never look at it apart from in these live streams, so there's not much interest for me in this. But if we see this this correction unwind itself, perhaps Bitcoin will start to recover again. So there we go. So a quick recap before we jump into the questions. So for me, really interesting stuff to watch next week. Stock markets, because we are where we are, but the trends are still down. We've had a good run over the last month. Lots of data coming out next week. Do we see stock markets start to roll over again next week? Let's see what happens. So I think that's an interesting one to watch, and the currencies. So for me, I'll be watching the dollar index. The dollar index is having a weak finish to the week, but the trends are still up all over the place for the dollar index. So what happens with the dollar index and of course the pound and the euro next week, particularly when we have all this economic data? Let's see what happens. Okay, so that's what I'm watching. So nothing that massively jumps out at me today to trade, but I think there's a lot potentially next week. I'll jump into the questions in a second, but just a quick reminder, to find out more, open an account, open a demo account, open a real account, all that stuff. Go to Capital.com. Any questions, drop me an email, david.jones@Capital.com. At Jones the Markets is my Twitter thing. I don't tweet very often. And jonesthemarkets.com to find out about my trading approach. And of course, follow Capital.com on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Okay, let's get into the questions. So we looked at the Ftse. What's your opinion on copper? Let's have a look. I've seen copper come up a couple of times actually. Let's have a look at copper. It's got absolutely slammed, hasn't it? And it's it's often seen as a barometer for the health of the economy, but it was a bit too late. The economies were it was holding up much better than the economic news would have suggested, but got absolutely slammed last week. Well, actually not last week, all the way through June. And here we are, so copper traded down to its worst levels since November 2020. So an 18-month low. So for me, would I buy it now? Okay, I wouldn't buy it now. But you could make an argument that because it's gone down in such a straight line, that the market's overreacted. So perhaps this is a trade we'll do now. So this is going to be an aggressive trade that the market has overreacted and copper has sold off too much. Be a buyer now with a stop under that most recent low from the 15th of July. That low is 313. So let's buy it. We'll say that we think 3 is going to be support. So we go 295 for a stop. We'll risk 100 quid as usual. Is a normal risk on these trades and the live streams. Okay, so I'm going to buy it now. Stop at 295, which is below the 15th of July low, and the risk is 100 quid. Let's see how that turns out. So, but for me, in terms of being more sensible and buying it, I'd want to see it make a base here. It's very rare that markets make a handbrake turn and suddenly we're back at 4.5 for copper. So I wonder, it's an interesting one to watch next week to see if we see a bit more bumping around here in copper. But absolutely clobbered over the last 6 weeks or so, the price of copper. So let's see what happens if that turns around. Coffee, someone said. Coffee was doing well. Coffee got clobbered as well, I think. I think he got clobbered. Oh no, it's just a bit boring. I think I've still got a trade on coffee in my own account. It's just boring at the moment. I mean, it's trading where it was in November last year. So we'd had some great trends in coffee, and it's just gone. I mean, at least it's not falling off a cliff. For me, the big trend is still up. Would I be a buyer now? Maybe a buyer next week. The closest I would have my stop, probably below 190 on coffee. The trend is still up. It's just, but like everything else, it's being weighed down this year, isn't it? It's not getting hit as hard as some of these other commodities. But for me, I'd quite happy to sit on my hands and see what happens next week, because I don't think any of these commodities are going to go racing away from here. But it's interesting because clearly with a lot of these commodities like oil, like coffee, like cotton and stuff like that coming off in price, that should help inflation come back a bit. But it's how long all of that takes to feed through to inflation. But for me, so coffee, trend's still up, but just a bit directionless at the moment. I see the trailing stop loss option, but it isn't yet available. Okay, I think you must be seeing that on the app because I absolutely haven't seen it yet, as far as I know. No, so I think that must be in the app. So that means that we're close to having it active, but unfortunately, I don't know any more than you do. But it will be good when it's in place. So I'm presuming if you can see it in the app, it's being tested. So hopefully that will be there. That'll be there soon. What do you think about the Nasdaq and the S&P? Yeah, did that. So we looked at the Nasdaq and the S&P, didn't we? So let's see what happens next week. But looking to see, I mean, it's already backed off a little bit, the S&P today, from the not magic 4,000 level. Maybe I think I would buy this dip if I was trading it today. I would buy this dip in the S&P for another squeeze through 4,000. But I would be cautious next week, like I said. Can we have a look at, let's do Swiss yen, someone said, or dollar Swiss, sorry, we haven't looked at that, have we? So dollar Swiss, that's the daily chart. We're seeing clearly, because we are seeing dollar weakness, we're seeing dollar Swiss fall. For me, it was a really obvious level to watch, 95s. And again, it's one of these ones, it's interesting going into next week. Absolutely still weak today, but let's see what happens next week. You mentioned Swiss yen. Let's have a look at that. I don't think we've ever looked at Swiss yen. Swiss yen, trend is up. For me, we have looked. I'd remember this. So for me, I would be a buyer of the dip, but again, it's having a weak day today. Let's see what happens next week. But for me, I'd see, well, where does this dip go, and look to be a buyer of Swiss yen next week. Let's see what happens. We looked at gold. We did gold. Can we have a look at Uniper? Uniper is a German natural gas utility company which is facing a difficult financial crisis. They're the worst sorts, aren't they? Difficult financial crises rather than easy financial crisis is what we all want, isn't it? So the stock, where's the stock trading now? So 28 euros, I guess that is, isn't it? 28, 29 euros. I think it's interesting, because given all that's gone on with Nord Stream, let me make sure I've got the right stock. Now, that's Juniper Networks. That's absolutely nothing to do with natural gas. Juniper Networks looks interesting though. So it's not that Juniper. So I should pay attention. Oh, this looks a bit more dramatic, doesn't it? That looks much more dramatic. My God. Okay, so it's gone from 42 euros this year to 7 euros today. Now, which way is the trend in Uniper? Absolutely down, isn't it? And breaking lower again today. The little blip might have sucked a few people in, but they're regretting that, buying at 12 euros on Wednesday, and the thing's at 7 today. So for me, that trend is still down. As you say, if they're involved in natural gas, so much uncertainty around that industry at the moment because of the geopolitical situation. So for me, if I was a seller now, where would your stop go though? My stop would have to go at least above 12.5, which is a wide stop. So for me, it's an interesting one to watch. It's probably not one I would trade, but absolutely still weak. Absolutely would not be a buyer personally for me until the thing stops falling. So yeah, still looks pretty weak. I've got two questions. What's the relationship between the dollar index and the S&P? I don't know, actually. I mean, the dollar is going up because of inflation and interest rates. You know, we're seeing a strong dollar. I'm not very good on correlations, so I couldn't give you like a two-line answer on the link between the dollar and the S&P. I suppose, could you make the argument that a weaker dollar is better for the S&P? Because a weaker dollar means that your euros and your pounds and your yen buy more, so you might invest more in the USA. You can make that argument. I personally don't get too tied up with the relationships between them. Can we use the AAI, all investor sentiment, to determine the lowest point in the S&P? If what you're talking about, I don't know what that sentiment number is you're talking about, but if you're talking about the sentiment we show, which is here, I always think it's interesting, but not that interesting, because you can almost guarantee, this is what our clients are doing, you can almost guarantee they'll be the wrong way around at major turning points. So I'm not too familiar with AAII investor sentiment, so I can't really help you too much with that. So I'm going to just Google it very quickly. Oh, there we go, I can see now. AAI investor sentiment survey. Oh God, let's have a look. I find this sort of stuff quite interesting, but I don't know how actually useful it is. And what I would always do is go the other way. Yeah, opinions of individual investors, where they think the market's headed. So where do they think it's headed? Bullish, they're all a bit bearish. Okay, that would make me lean to be bullish. So 42% of these investors think that the market's going to be bearish in the next 6 months. That would make me lean to think the market's going to go up. So I think some of these sentiment indicators are quite good as a contrary indicator, because most people are wrong at major turning points. Okay, what's next? I think that pound against the dollar is really the same as euro dollar when it comes to the charts. What do you think? I would agree with you most of the time. Most of the time, absolutely. But there are times when clearly they do tend to move the same direction against the dollar. But there are times when the euro is weaker or the pound is weaker. But you're right. I mean, they're pretty much the same thing. I mean, clearly, if we took the dollar out of the equation and look at euro sterling, so the euro over the last 3 months has been stronger than the pound has. But if we go back to September 2020 to March of this year, the euro was falling against the pound. So broadly speaking, pound against dollar, euro dollar, absolutely agree. Pretty similar charts, but there will often be slight differences in how relatively weak or strong they are against that. Okay, Tesla. Yeah, Tesla had good numbers yesterday, didn't they? Or whenever it was. I do think I had to write something. And I think this $600 level, it's been a good level for Tesla. And so for me, I would absolutely buy a dip on Tesla from here, because even though markets continue to fall in June, Tesla held above $600. So for me, if we saw a bit of a cooling off next week, it's broken out of I don't know whatever you want to call that, double bottom, triple bottom, I don't care. It's broken out for me. If we had a little bit of a pullback, maybe down to 760 and a bit of a bounce, that looks interesting for Tesla. So I would be a buyer of the dip with a stop under 600 on Tesla. Can we look at Spirax Sarco? Spirax Sarco is UK company, isn't it? Spirax Sarco. Is it UK? I think it is, isn't it? Engineering. There we go. Okay, let's have a look at Spirax Sarco. Now, I think that's interesting. That is the sort of thing that would be of interest to me as an investor, but perhaps not yet. I think, because you could argue, and I probably would argue, that trend is still down since November, when they were at 170p, and now they're 113p. But it's trying to stage. This has been a pretty good recovery, hasn't it? In the same way that was a pretty good recovery, but it eventually ran out of steam. Sainsbury's looks a bit like this as well, actually. We'll have a look at that in a minute. So for me, I'd still be wary of that big downtrend, and the risk is it's going to sell off, but perhaps we will get to the stage where the trend breaks, if that makes sense. So ones that have big moves against the downtrend are always interesting to me. Sainsbury's is one. I think I mentioned it. I've been in it in the past in Sainsbury's. Should have sold out up here. Ended up selling out here somewhere. But Sainsbury's is a similar one where we have quite a persistent downtrend. And actually, maybe it's even trying to break out of it now. But so to me, the Spirax Arco thing, trend's still down. So I'd be cautious about it turning down. But perhaps at some point over the next few months, we see it start to break out. And then it starts to look a buy the pullback one. That Sainsbury's looks quite interesting now. Anyway, enough of that. Swiss franc against the Swedish. I don't know if it's krone or krona. Never known that. But whatever it is, the Swedish currency. Swiss, I don't know. It's tricky, isn't it? What do you think? I've got absolutely no idea. What would you do here? I suppose, right? An aggressive trade. I'd be a buyer now if I had to do anything. Be a buyer at 1060 with a stop at the other side of 1040. So maybe 1030 on a stop and see, does it have another run up towards 1088, 1090? And then if it breaks out, of course, that's a big level, this, isn't it? If it breaks out through there, that gets quite interesting then. So that's how I'd be a buyer. There we go. Be a buyer of the Swiss franc against the Swedish currency and see what happens. But it's always quite difficult, isn't it? When it's hit almost the exact same level it hit in March, it's backed off. What's he going to do? Is he going to have another look up there? Is he going to blast through? Or is it just going to dump back to below 10 where it was? So let's see. Let's see what happens. But a tricky one there. US flash services PMI well below expectations. Thanks for that, Richard. So that, I reckon, that's the thing that spooked stock markets. I bet they're bouncing back though. Yes. So that's the data coming out, I guess. There you go. So slammed the Nasdaq about 150 points lower. Let's see what happens. When the dollar weakens, US equities and commodities should soar. So I'm glad you confirmed that, my guesswork on that. So cable, we looked at cable, pound against the dollar. So again, if we look on the hourly chart on cable, I think that trend is still up. What's it done? It's jumped, isn't it? So that's caused the dollar to weaken. Clearly, that PMI data that I think Richard flashed up. I'd be tempted to be a seller here, I wonder what happened. Where are these highs from earlier in the week? If pound against the dollar, what shows this is an hourly chart. If it showed a bit of weakness now, it could be quite an interesting short, taking the view that the market has perhaps overreacting to these weaker PMI numbers. So where is it? It's 120.50, let's say. Let's see where it ends today. See, should we have gone short at 120.50 or thereabouts? And does it just get itself knocked back a bit? Interesting to see what happens on that. And it's still strong for now. Dollar. Can we have a look at Siren Gold? Siren Gold on the Aussie Stock Exchange. Siren Gold. Oh, we don't do that one. Siren Nasdaq. Sorry, we don't do that one, unfortunately, for some reason. Not sure why. Platinum. I was looking at, was it Palladium I was looking at this week, and I wondered. It's moved already. Missed it. Or maybe I haven't missed it. Oh, maybe not. I wondered, was Palladium making a base this week? Actually, someone mentioned platinum in the chat, and I was looking at Palladium on Wednesday this week, and I just wondered, this sort of rough trend here, and it got knocked back in June to about 1800, and it came back to it in July, and we're at 2000 now. So that could be an interesting one to watch. I mean, I've often said it's been a great one over the years, Palladium. Some really good trends in Palladium. It's gone absolutely nuts in the last couple of years. Enormous swings. But that could be an interesting market for next week in Palladium. Can we have a look at Hungarian forint, US dollar? Hungarian forint. Hungarian. So dollar huff. Here we go. Dollar huff. Personally, absolutely be a buyer of that one. Buy the dip. That's what I would do. Obviously, you do what you want to do. But for me, that's a great trend. So again, we are seeing dollar strength against the Hungarian currency. Deal reached between Russia and Ukraine to resume grain exports from Black Sea, says the UN chief. Okay, let's have a look at corn or something in a minute if we've got it. So for me, that's a really good trend. So if another one to watch next week, clearly, as I said, for a few of these markets, we've seen the dollar weak over the last 5 to 7 days. We're seeing that in the dollar against the Hungarian currency. But that trend is still up. So for me, I would be watching to see, do we get any dollar strength next week? Let's see what happens. Can we have a look at silver? We did silver. I said, and I hate silver, in case you weren't here. I mean, the trend is down on silver. So I'd absolutely be a seller of rallies on silver until it breaks that trend. But I hate trading silver. But, so it traded to a low this week. The lowest it's been in 2 years or so. So I think the risk is for silver, any rallies like we've seen since April just run out of steam. So I'm not a fan of silver. I'm not one of these people who stacks silver ahead of the coming zombie apocalypse. It's not, for me, it's never been a nice market to trade. How do you move your stop loss on your winning trades? It's quite complicated. Go to my website and you can find out more. But basically, I don't move them too early is perhaps the best description. I think, going on one of my rants now, most people don't use stop losses because they're idiots, and most people lose money. Those things are correlated because they don't take control of their risk. And then I think the problem for those who do use stop losses, and I did this for years, they place them too tight. Okay, so they get knocked out and they get frustrated. And then the third problem, when we start using stop losses, we're too keen to move them too quickly. So for me, I put my stop loss in place and then I wait for the market to have a decent move. So I do have a mechanical approach for moving stop losses, but I've got to have a half decent move before I move a stop loss. If you're risking losing £200, for example, and then when you're £50 in profit, you move your stop loss to break even, you are never going to have a profitable trading strategy because you're snatching at your profits and letting your losses get too big. So for me, I need a big move before I move the stop loss, which is why in a lot of these open trades, I end up giving back a lot of profit because I'm reluctant to move the stop loss. But look at, if you take the Dow trade as example, the Wall Street trade down here, I don't know where the original stop loss was, but I only moved it. I'm 600 quid in profit now. The original risk was 300 quid. So I need a decent move in the market to move the stop loss. So I am patient with the stop losses, which doesn't come naturally to me, but I do it. We'll be having a look at dollar yen. I'm guessing dollar yen is not going to look too dissimilar to the dollar index. There we go. A little bit of dollar weakness, but the trend absolutely still up. So again, and this whole dollar thing next week, do we see the dollar snap back next week? So for me, still weak, but I'd absolutely be a buyer in dips. 132 seems like a good area to watch next week. Let's see what happens. And that's it, I think. We're all done, aren't we? I think we're all done. What was I going to look at? Grain, because of that news. Do we cover wheat? Wheat, London wheat futures. Well, it's not really moved. I thought, okay, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know anything about commodities, but apart from the trends, but we've not seen much of a movement on that. I don't think we cover. Oh, we do cover corn. There's a bit of a move in corn going on. Perhaps that is as a result of that the deal between Russia and Ukraine to resume grain exports. That does look like a bit of a move. Let's see though. See what happens. What's the daily chart look like? Daily chart. I mean, that's been the effect of it. Okay, let's see. Keep an eye on it. So lots to look at next week. Lots of data coming out next week. Lots of inflation stuff coming out this week. Just a quick reminder, Bank of Japan on Monday night. Aussie inflation on Wednesday. Big one for next week. Wednesday night, US interest rate decision. More about the press conference around that rather than the decision itself. US economic data on Thursday. And then European economic data on Thingy Day, Friday. That's it. Any questions, drop me an email. we'll wrap things up there. We'll do it all again next week. Thanks for coming along. Always enjoy doing these. Quick rattle through the markets. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your weekend. And we'll see where we are this time next week. Thanks very much.